Yeah, so like Mary said, I've been raising chickens for a little bit of time now, and it's interesting when talking about homesteading and especially like just getting into some things. It seems like chickens and sourdough bread are the two common themes of. We sometimes joke that they're gateway drugs into homesteading, and chickens definitely has earned that reputation. Seems like chickens, and then it just cascades down into other things. So. But for good reason. Chickens are a wonderful way to get started producing some of your own food, some of your really high quality protein. We'll talk about some of that stuff later. Um, so Mary, yeah, kind of read my bio, and I thought here at the beginning I'd just share a little bit of my story, of my a little snapshot into my growing up with chickens and stuff like that. And then we'll just jump into the meat chicken raising, so just give you a little context for my life. So I grew up in suburbia, on in the Northeast, and on the right there, that's me at I don't know what age I am there, but pretty little. And our family garden there, and I loved growing radishes, and just thought that they were one of the funnest vegetables to grow because they were bright red and they grew so quickly, and you could pull them out of the ground in about 28 days later. So I was just always tickled with radishes. And then on the left, when we moved out of suburbia, to upstate New York. That's our first hoop house on our farm. So that's me working, getting something ready there. But livestock was really always my passion. So I had meat chicken or chickens at like age 11. I actually took this picture out of a scrapbook that my mom put together. So there's some of my chickens in the early years on the left, and then I had dairy goats, and that's me bottle feeding some of my babies. But the main growing up on the family farm, the main focus of our farm was produce or retail vegetables. So there I am cultivating, I think, carrots on the right-hand side, and then that's one of our high tunnels full of greens in the wintertime. So I gained a lot of experience interacting with customers, raising livestock, getting to understand agriculture business from a pretty early age, and was pretty privileged to have some great mentors that, even in my teenage years, I understood a lot of the economics and stuff, business around farming. So that was really neat. So livestock always being my passion, I applied for an internship at Polyface Farms, and was accepted. And I got to walk past, many of you will recognize this sign. I got to walk past that sign every day on my way to work for a year and a half. And I probably wouldn't be sitting in this chair today, sitting sharing with you if I hadn't been for the couple of years I had at Joel Salatin's farm. So since we're talking about chickens, this is a picture of our intern crew right before processing day. We did a lot of processing of chickens at Polyface. We processed twice a week for 5 to 6 months during the summer. So I was able to
Jonathan,
help.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Yep.
Can we please take a minute to mute? For some reason, it's not letting me mute participants as they come on. Well, if everybody could mute, please, so we can get the best recording, that would be great.
There you go. Want me to back up a little bit, Mary?
Yep, I think just a little bit. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. So yeah, this was our vegetable farm growing up. Just an example. It's me cultivating on the right hand side, and really, really cool privilege to grow up in this way and get to see from a young age in my teenage years, just the ins and outs of ag production. Um, so my interest in or livestock, I should say, led me to apply for an internship at Polyface Farms, in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And so I have to pinch myself sometimes that I was able to walk past this sign, which is recognized around the world really as a model for sustainable regenerative agriculture and just systems that work well, whether it's homestead scale or large, more commercial scale regenerative agriculture. So spending a year and a half there, no doubt, I don't think I'd be sitting here tonight sharing with you this if it hadn't been for that experience at Polyface. Kind of launched my career further than I would have ever thought possible. So this is actually our intern crew just before chicken processing day. And as an intern, you did a lot of chicken processing and raising of broilers. So you got really familiar with the ins and outs, pun intended, of the broiler. We probably handled 15 to 20,000 birds in the course of a 6 month season. And those were all directly marketed to consumers in the Washington, D.C. and metro area, or in Virginia too as well. So that's the processing line on processing day. Um, And that's actually where I met my wife. And we started dating. But after Polyface, I managed a nonprofit farm in Vermont for a couple of years, probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever worked. Got some hands-on nonprofit management experience. We got married, and as a grass farmer, of course, you have to take your wedding pictures in a pasture full of grass. But after that, we landed in Oklahoma for 4 years managing a ranch. We did grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, and pastured poultry, and we marketed most of our products directly to consumer as well. So that's our family today. After 4 years in Oklahoma, we moved back up to Alexandria, where my wife is from. That's where we live today. I work full time for SFA, and I this is the our farming business. And you can see our mission and vision. I won't read through it, but that's the focus of our business there. So we currently raise hair sheep, goats, meat goats, and pastured poultry as well. And we're planning on scaling the pastured poultry side of things considerably this year. So, all right. So that's a little bit about my background. So you might ask why raise meat chickens, and most of you on the call probably already know, or this webinar probably already know why. I think it's the quickest way to raise a high quality protein, and I even checked, and rabbit is not as quick. It's a 3 month versus a 2 month turnaround on rabbit. There may be some sort of like fish or aquaculture thing I'm not aware of. Maybe some fish are quicker, but broilers, especially Cornish cross, are one of the fastest ways to get high quality protein. I really like it because it's easy for kids to be involved with. You don't have to be worried about the cow, you know, running over a kid or something like that. Even goats and sheep can get a little big sometimes for some little kids. So it's nice. Chickens are easy for kids, and they can even manage it too. Nice thing is they don't require high investment in equipment like other enterprises do, or land. You can raise a lot of meat on just a couple acres. Chicken's a very popular protein, so if you have extra, it's pretty easy to sell it to your friends and neighbors. Chicken's always been the easiest protein for me to market. There's a lot of pull on the marketplace for good quality chicken across the spectrum. Obviously, food security for your family, better quality than store-bought, kind of goes without saying. You can pretty much always produce better than what you can buy at the store. So meat chicken timeline. So for those of you who maybe have never done meat chickens or broilers, I'll probably use both terms interchangeably tonight. We're looking at about a 7 to 9 week timeline. So week 0, your baby chicks are going to show up in the brooder. Typically, you're going to be in that brooding stage for 2 to 3 weeks. If you're raising them on pasture, you'll probably move them out to pasture at about week 3, and they'll stay out on pasture until about week 7 when you can start
You
slaughtering.
see.
So, and I'm just going to say, as far as my experience goes, everything as far as meat chickens or poultry that I've done has always been in a pasture-based model. I don't really have any experience in confinement models. So what you're going to hear tonight is mostly going to be focused on, producing pastured poultry or producing poultry on grass. So just kind of a disclaimer there before we get started. Okay, so breed selection. Cornish cross is the high octane NASCAR type breed of the chicken world, in the meat chicken world especially. That's probably 96 to 98% of what's raised in the industry, and even most like small scale farmers are raising a lot of those. And for good reason. They grow very fast. They're very, very efficient with feed. They produce a really nice, end product, and they do it very quickly. There are some other breeds like Red Rangers or Freedom Rangers. They are a red broiler. They were bred in, I think, France. They're a little bit slower growing. I have grown some of them. They have a nice flavor, but they do take a little bit longer, and the finished product isn't quite as nice. You can use the male chicks of many other standard breeds. Feed conversion is really, really poor, and it takes you probably 16 to 18 weeks to get something that might be 3 to 4 pounds. And most consumers, we're used to going to the supermarket and getting our nice plump chickens. And so most consumers just don't really care for that product. However, you can, if you're doing soup chicken or something like that, that can work really well for that. So where to get chicks? I would also say probably most people's chicks are coming from mail order hatcheries. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to have a resources list of where you can find. I'm not going to list all the different hatcheries, but Minnesota has a couple. There's a couple actually here in central Minnesota that you can order directly from. Your local farm store is a great resource. Fleet Farm, Runnings, Fleet Supply, whatever you have in your neighborhood can also be a great source. And I'm going to make a note right here because I know with avian flu and stuff, it's been a little bit more difficult for people to find chicks. The good news is, from what I can tell, most of the avian flu stuff is affecting the layer flocks and like the egg-laying chickens. So it seems like most places are pretty sold out of egg-laying chickens, but you can still find meat chickens. At least I've been able to. So I was a little worried because I hadn't yet ordered my chicks for the year, but I was actually able to find them. So, and they're not, you don't have to wait till August or September. So you should be able to still find some this spring. Um, so anyhow, you can also hatch your own. You can buy, fertilized eggs, get them shipped to you, put them in an incubator and do it that way. I think most people opt to just get day old chicks. And believe it or not, they ship them in the mail and they will either arrive at your post office, go pick them up, or sometimes your mail carrier will bring them out to your farm too. So when you get chicks, you get day old chicks, they first couple weeks of their life, they need to go in what's called the brooder, which is essentially a warm environment that mimics a mother hen. And so the perfect brooder is going to pretty much emulate that mother hen with her baby chicks. So you're just going to keep that chick warm when they need it, but they also can have the independent ability to regulate their heat. You can see in this picture, there's a chick that's kind of under mom and there's a chick that's not. So the chicks can kind of decide what they want. Um, and that needs to be, fairly consistent. It's also well ventilated. You do want good air circulation in a brooder. You don't want it too tight, and that'll cause, sickness and a moisture buildup, which is really not good for poultry. You want it well ventilated, but you don't want drafts. Okay, drafts are a big no-no in brooding situations. You want it really dry, and you want it predator proof. And predators can be some of the worst predators in brooders can be rats. So make sure it's rat proof as well. So I've got some slides here that go through a couple different brooder setups. There are probably as many different brooder setups as there are, different ways that you can raise chickens as well. So this is one. This is actually Jared Lumen's setup. He used to work for SFA, and so it's pretty simple. Just a heat lamp, feeder, water, and round, kind of round circles. So let's see. And then here's another picture. This is actually the polyface brooder. So this one has propane hovers for heat, and you can see the trough feeders. Propane hovers in the industry. So when I say the industry and a lot of the big poultry houses, that's pretty standard for as far as a heat source. Propane's a pretty efficient source of heat to keep chicks warm, and also very safe. You can also see trays of feed. We'll talk a little bit about that later under feeding and watering. Trays of feed there on the bottom of the picture for the first couple of days. There's some trough feeders. On the back side of the brooder, you can see that white pipe. That's a nipple water line on the back wall. Very common. That's on-demand water, pressurized. So you don't have to kind of refill waters all the time. This brooder here, just for context, was set up to be able to brood 1,800 chicks at a time. So there's 3 sections of 600 chicks. So this is just one of the sections. The other thing I want you to note is the concrete walls. So this brooder is designed as, think of it kind of like a cookie sheet on the bottom. So you could do 8 to 10 batches of chicks, and you don't have to clean it out entirely. You just let the bedding keep building up. You put a new layer on after every batch of chicks, and then you just clean it out one time a year. And that's efficiency's sake, so you can turn a batch over pretty quick. You can move a batch out to pasture, and then you can, put day old chicks in the next day and start the whole process over again. So that concrete cookie sheet keeps all the bedding contained, and it allows it to build up to 12, 15, 16 inches and start to decompose. And at the end of the season, it'll actually be a nice little heat source for the chicks, kind of like radiant floor heat. So just a note on that. If I was to build a brooder, it would be pretty similar like this, and then you could have a skid steer come and clean it out one time a year. So the bedding here is sawdust or planer shavings from cabinet shops. So here's a close-up of the propane hovers. Sorry, the pictures aren't the greatest quality, but you can kind of see and get an idea of what they look like when they're firing. And essentially, it's a propane flame, and then there's a disc there that pushes that heat back down towards the ground, and there's the big hover, just keeps that heat contained right underneath that hover. And then the chicks can go underneath if they get cold, and they can leave if they decide they want to go somewhere else too. So this is what I really like. It's called an Ohio brooder, and it was developed, I think, in the 50s, maybe the 40s, by Ohio Extension. And it's basically a box with heat lamp bulbs inside. And I really like this option for brooder because it's really cheap to build it. It's really cheap to run. And then the chicks can kind of decide, kind of like the propane brooders, they can decide they can go underneath if they get cold and they can run out and they can, eat and drink if they want to, or if they get too warm. So let's see, I got another picture of it here. So that's what it looks like when it's flipped up. So it's just two heat lamp bulbs, one on either end. And then as the chicks grow and they don't need as much heat, you can always change out the bulbs for a lesser wattage bulb, or you can just unplug one of the heat lamp bulbs. But you can build something like this with scrap wood. And then on the top, let's see if I have another picture. Well, you can't really see it in this picture, but on the top, you can either put like a sheet of 2-inch R10 insulation foam to keep the heat kind of down, or you can just pile wood chips or shavings on top, and that holds the heat down as well. So this is actually, there's people that use these brooders in very large settings, and they work great. So it's a very great option. So last thing too on brooders is get creative. Like, obviously you can use a kiddie pool for a brooder if you want with a heat lamp. And on the right, that's what we brooded some chicks in last year, just in our garage. Literally 4x8 sheets of, pretty old OSB that I ripped into 2 foot pieces, and I just, screwed them together, and it worked. We brooded, I think, 85 chicks in there in the garage, and then you can take it down when you're done. So very easy. It doesn't need to be difficult. I mean, these are baby chickens, so we don't need to build something extravagant. It's just something to keep them warm, keep them dry, keep the drafts off of them, and keep predators away, and that's really all you need. And remember, it's a short time period. If you're moving them out to pasture, it's probably going to be 3 weeks that they're in there. So you don't need to build something that's, crazy extravagant for them. So a little bit on space requirements, and here's a chart that kind of goes through it. Now, I will say that, like, on the temperature side of things, that's a good starting point, but I like to let the chicks kind of decide, like, and that's the benefit of that Ohio brooder is you can have it be 95, 100 degrees under there, but if they get too hot, they'll come to the edge, and they can kind of self-regulate, and that's really nice as opposed to taking a room or a building and then, putting a thermostat on the side on the wall and then keeping it at 95. So I think having some zones where they can go and kind of self-regulate is important. As they grow, obviously they need more space. And if you remember in that first picture of the brooder with the white circles, that's actually pretty standard practice even in the large poultry houses is when they start their chicks in there, they will have circles to keep them. And it's nice to have circles because if you have like hard 90-degree corners, they can pile up in the corner if they get scared and they can smother each other. So anytime you can do more of a circular or an oval shape for a brooder, especially when they're really small, is really helpful. It cuts your mortality down, especially if they get scared. And then as the chicks grow, they just get rid of the circles and let them, expand onto the entire house. So that's kind of the way the industry would do it in the bigger poultry houses. The other thing I want to point out is ventilation. I'm trying to remember, I think there's 2 complete air changes per day is kind of standard. You really do want to change the air over. Chicks will start putting off at about 2 weeks, they'll start putting off quite a bit of moisture. And so if you get a lot of moisture buildup, you can get humidity issues. Humidity issues will lead to respiratory problems in chickens, and that's, one of the worst things for a baby chick or poultry in general. So keeping it dry, and the way to do that is to keep ventilation. So keep some air movement coming through, and you can kind of see just a guideline on the far right column there as far as what you want as far as CFMs for chicks. And then on the bottom, at 4 weeks, they are pretty much fully feathered and ready to wean from the heat. So you shouldn't need to have any more heat for them, unless you're growing in the winter, which at that point you still would want to provide some supplemental heat. Okay, so bedding sources for your brooder. So shavings are pretty much the most common thing that are used. Sawdust is really good too. Make sure it's not ultra fine dust, and really fine sawdust is not good for chicks. The other thing is when a baby chick first comes in or gets into the brooder, it'll start like pecking and eating at just about everything. And so if it's sawdust, they'll start eating the sawdust, and then they'll fill up their crop or their gizzard with sawdust, and that's not obviously going to provide them nutrition. So you do have to be careful that you don't get stuff in the brooder, especially initially, that they're going to think is food because they just don't know better at that stage. Wood chips, I've used wood chips successfully. Just make sure they're dry. If they're green, you'll have problems. You don't want that. Peat moss has also been used, but it's pretty dusty. So just if you do use it, you might want to damp it down a little bit just to drop the dust, let it dry off, and then you should be good. And so pit moss, so actually that's not a typo. That actually is a product made out of recycled organic paper material that's come out on the market. It's a potting material as well as they're making an animal bedding material out of this stuff. I just found out about it recently, but the people that I've read that are using it are really, really liking it. So I don't know if it's even available here in central Minnesota, but something to check into, especially if you like the idea of the recycled paper. So avoid straw in hay. In brooders, their straw is pretty slippery. Also, unless it's chopped really fine, which would make a lot of dust, and you don't want the dust. It's not really absorbent enough. And it's nice to have some material that the chicks, when they get a little older, can scratch around, kind of encourage that natural behavior. And hay just gets really soggy and just doesn't absorb stuff really well. Excuse me. Okay, so heat sources. Kind of touched on that already, but there's pretty much two options for heat lamps: 125 watt, 250 watt bulbs. If you're using an Ohio brooder like it's pictured, you can swap them out as the chicks grow if you want to save a little energy. There's also red bulbs, there's white bulbs. They say the red bulbs have a more calming effect. I've never really noticed too much of a difference personally, but there's different options. There's heat plates out there people are using. That's going to be on a pretty small scale probably. There's infrared heaters that people are also using. They're much more costly, but it's a nice feeling heat. Propane hovers, talked about those earlier. I've even seen people that are doing in-floor radiant heat for their brooder houses now. Obviously, a much, much more expensive option, but people are starting to do that. So that's an option. I would say 80 to 90% of people getting started in chicks are just going to use a heat lamp with a bulb, and you should be able to get along just fine. If you're considering just using like a single heat lamp, you'll probably want, and then hanging it like you saw in some of my pictures earlier, probably one heat lamp per 25, 35 chicks is enough. And then you'd probably want another one. So this Ohio brooder that I had pictures of, it's a 4 foot by 6 foot, and you can do about 250 chicks in that size brooder. So, okay. So monitoring your brooder. One of the things as you get chicks in there, you get the temperature right and hopefully get the ventilation right. You just need to like watch them, and experience will tell you how they're doing. So on the right-hand side, you've got some different diagrams, and typically if you see your chicks all bunched up in one side, that indicates there's a draft somewhere, and that would be that top left diagram. Brooder too cold, they're all huddled underneath the heat source or huddled together. The brooder too hot, they're all as far away from the heat source as possible or on the exterior of the brooder trying to get cooled off. A brooder that is just right, you're going to have chicks that are comfortable. They're going to be spread out all over the brooder, or there'll be some underneath the Ohio brooder, and there'll be some eating, there'll be some drinking. Sound is a big thing with chicks. You can tell when they're unhappy by how they're peeping. So happy chicks make happy noises. If they get really loud, they're unhappy. And really loud peeping. That's a sign something's wrong. So you're going to need to adjust something. They're either too drafty, or they're out of water, or they're too cold, or something like that. If your chicks are completely silent, and I've seen this before, you need to suspect a predator, typically a rat, or some other disturbance. They'll often go completely quiet if something scares them. So that's another thing to kind of listen for. If they all of a sudden stop making noise, something's wrong. It's kind of like your kid when they're naughty down the hallway, you don't know what they're doing. Something's too quiet, got to go check. So anyhow, keep your eye on your chicks. And experience, as you do this more, experience will help you learn what's going on here. Okay, so watering in the brooder. Two primary options, kind of as I see it. You've got your fountain style waterers there on the right, and your nipple style drinkers. The one on the left there, you'll notice I've hung it right on the edge of the brooder there, so they can pop out, get a drink, go back in the warmth. And if I had a fountain style water, I would put the edge right under the the edge of the brooder there so they can get water while they're underneath. I don't have a picture of this, unfortunately, but this nipple waterer, you can either connect it to a hydrant or a pressurized water source with a pressure reducer, or this one I just have hooked up to a 5-gallon bucket and it's being gravity fed. So that's just I think it's like a 1.5-inch PVC pipe capped at the end, and then just drilled holes and screwed in the little nipples. You can buy those from like Farm Tech, different farm supply stores. Um, the only issue I've seen with any system, doesn't really matter the brand, is they do tend to leak a little bit. So you'll get more moisture buildup under these. The nice thing about the nipple style drinker is they are very clean. You don't have to like clean waterers, or there's no shavings getting in the water or manure or anything like that. So it's also pretty efficient. You can take a whole bucket of water and fill up that 5-gallon bucket and you're done for the day, versus the smaller fountain style waters. You got to like constantly, especially as they get about that 2-week age, they start going through a lot of water as they eat more feed. So, but those are some options. Couple different options there on water. So before we start talking about chicken feed, first one thing is chickens are omnivores, okay? So they are not vegetarians. You'll see it often advertised on eggs or chicken products that they're fed vegetarian feed. Well, that's actually not probably the best actually for them, because they do need animal protein as some part of their diet, because they do need high protein sources to do well. You can see that chicken there obviously found a worm. Chickens, so they do need a diet that is pretty consistent with what an omnivore would eat. Water is obviously essential. Feed, typically a grain ration to help get the protein amount that they need to grow well. And that's very important for like the Cornish cross type meat chicken. It's still important for the others, especially in the chick stage, but you can fudge a little bit with some of the more standard breeds. They're not the high octane they don't need the high octane that the Cornish cross do. So the other note and the other mistake I've seen people make is that pasture should always be considered a supplemental feed for poultry. It's not a substitute. Okay, so just because you're putting chickens out on pasture, they cannot get 100% of their diet from pasture and do well or grow. Cornish cross will probably start dying on you. They still need grain or a grain ration. In pasture, they can get maybe 10 to 20% of what they need, and if there's a lot of insects, that's even better. Cornish cross chickens are not the greatest at foraging and chasing bugs. They will, especially when they're younger, but as they get older, they don't like to move as much. They grow pretty quickly. So anyhow, then chicken digestive system. Whoops, I do have a typo up there on the top. So the chicken is just a kind of a quick overview, and I'll talk about grit later, but when a chicken eats, the first place it goes is into this, call it a sac called the crop. And then it goes on into the gizzard. And both the crop and the gizzard rely on like little rocks, and we call it grit, to help grind up the food, because chickens don't have teeth. Okay. So they eat whatever they swallow whole, and it goes down in these rocks, and there's a muscle and it moves the rocks around, basically grinds up the food, and then it goes further on to the digestive system. So grit is a really important part of a chicken's life, and they can get their own stones if they're out foraging. Most laying chickens will probably get enough. Meat chickens, I always suggest having grit as a supplement, just to help them perform better and convert feed more efficiently. So here is a sample poultry ration. It's fairly simple. This is from the Fertrell company. You'll probably hear me talk about Fertrell quite a bit. Been a big fan of their products and information over the years. They've been a sponsor of some of our events, SFA events. And they also have a lot of open source information just out there on their website as far as rations go. So if you're interested in maybe even mixing your own feed, I have done it in the past. It's really not that complicated. This is just a corn, roasted soybeans, oats, and as far as the grains go. And then they're adding alfalfa meal for protein. Fish meal is very, very high protein and also gives them a lot of essential like amino acids and stuff that chickens need. The poultry NutriBalancer is basically a vitamin and mineral pack, and then the aragonite is a calcium source. So this is, you would want to, crack the corn or grind the corn and probably roll the soybeans a little bit, and maybe split the oats. But other than that, this is a very simple ration for poultry. And then this ration in particular is what I use and will be using, and it does a very good job finishing a broiler. So I really I like the Fertrell approach. All right, so feeding in the brooder. Um, as far as options for feeders, trough feeders are my favorite, simply because they allow a lot of like feeder space for chicks and they're easy. That's what you see there on the left. There's also like, I think those are called turbo feeders on the right. It does give you a little more like reservoir for feed, so you can fill up the top and then they just kind of eat it out of the bottom. I don't really like hanging feeders in the brooder just because if they get swinging or something, they can kind of hit chicks. Just kind of like keeping things stationary in the brooder. I do have some hanging feeder styles I like. I'll show you those later when we talk about getting stuff out on pasture. So feed, 1 to 3 weeks, you're going to do a starter, and that's typically a 20 to 22% protein. And your grower, which is going to be 3 to 4 weeks to finish, is your 19 to 20% protein feed. I prefer a mash, which is what you see in all these pictures, to a crumble or pellets. Um, Crumble or pellets, back to that grit conversation, when it gets wet and when it gets into that crop and gizzard, it tends to just mush and turn into like just a goo, and it's very difficult for the bird to move it through. The mash still has some texture, so it's easier for the bird to like move it through the system. Um, I've also heard, I don't have a ton of evidence to support this, but I've also heard in the process of making it into a mash and crumble, they have to heat it, and so you do lose some of the nutritional value. I think there's a cold press way to make a pellet, but I don't know that every company is able to use that. So anyhow, I just like mash. It's typically cheaper as well when you're buying feed. And also the chick grit, don't forget that. You can feed that weekly and just throw that on top of the feed after you feed on a food trough, or you can just feed it free choice in a separate feeder. Um, First couple days in the brooder, just a side note, I like to throw feed on like either a piece of cardboard. Cardboard's okay. It's kind of slippery, and I don't like slippery things under chicks because they can get some leg damage. Or those trays we saw in one of the earlier brooder pictures. And that's because chicks, when they first come in, they start pecking at everything. And so they'll go right on that tray and start pecking at the feed, and you want them to do that. Sometimes it takes them a little bit more time to figure out, oh, there's feed over in this feeder too. So first couple of days, that really helps. Throw some grit on there, throw some feed, and that just helps them to get off to a really great start. Space requirements. So 1/2 inch is trough space per bird, up to 3 weeks of age. As they grow, that'll increase. Water space can be half of that. They're going to spend far more time eating than they are drinking, so you don't need as many waterers as you do feeders. Okay, so time to move out. If you're moving them out of the brooder, you are going to probably look to do that at about that three week mark. Adult feathers are mostly in. Your average temp is 60 degrees outside or so. You can harden off chicks like you can harden off transplants before you plant them outside. You can just start pulling the heat back a couple of days and just kind of get them used to it, so it's not a complete shock when they go out. It's better to slowly condition them than to just dump them outside and then they get into a complete shock, and it could be like a 20 degree swing in temperatures. That would be really rough on them. So typically I'm moving chicks out of the brooder around 2.5 to 3 weeks. I'll watch the weather. If there's bad weather coming, I'm going to hold them in the brooder a little bit longer. I've moved chicks out at 2 weeks and they're just fine. If we've got a nice stretch of, 80-degree weather coming during the day, they're just fine. So I'll get them out. But don't hesitate to hold them in if you're just a little uncertain about what the weather looks like. If you're moving to like a portable pen, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, I would hold off on moving it for the first couple of days. That's just another stressor. Let the chicks acclimate to the new environment, and then typically the manure buildup at this age is not like a lot, so you can just wait a day to move it and then let them acclimate to the new environment, and then start rotating them. So I do want to make a note about chicken crates. You're seeing a lot of pictures of chicken crates. They're not essential, but if you do end up buying some chicken crates, there are differences. So you'll see in the right-hand side, that is what you call a chick crate, and it's got that door on the end that you can see is open, as well as a little door in the top. And the difference between a chick crate and a normal poultry crate, which is what you see mostly on this trailer on the left-hand side, is that the whole spacing is um, smaller for the chick crate. That the idea is they can't get their head out and then get it crushed as you're stacking crates up. That will happen. As you can see in this picture, there's a chick sticking its head out of the crate. If you slide up a crate right next to it, you're going to crush the chick, and it'll be end of that one. So you want to be careful about that when you're moving them out. But if you do go buy chicks, chick crates are far more expensive, but they are super nice. The other thing about chick crates is they have like a false bottom. So the chick's toes can't get crushed when they're sliding around like on the back of a truck or whatever. So that keeps their feet, keeps you from taking off their toes. These other normal poultry crates don't have that, and this is what's typically used to move birds to processing. So I just want to point out a couple difference in crates. Very, very nice to have. If you have them, they're so make transporting poultry, really, really easy. So, okay, so let's talk about possibilities or pens for moving out onto pasture. So this is a chicken tractor. This is kind of what I started raising some of my first birds in. This is just a 4x10 a pen. You can put 20 to 25 broilers or meat chickens in there. It's really simple to move it without a dolly. You can just slide it by hand. It gained popularity through a book called Chicken Tractor. I think it was written maybe 20, 25 years ago, and I've got it in my book selection at the end of this, so you can see that there. This is the classic Salatin style pen that a lot of people are familiar with. Holds 75, 85 birds. You do need a dolly to move it. It's a little bit heavier, but this allows you to raise a few more chickens, and with just one pen, and still be able to move it by hand without, use of a machine or a tractor or something like that. This is all Polyface uses for raising 15,000 broilers a year. So once you get familiar with how to use the pen, how to move it, you can get very, very fast. This is the dolly for moving the pen. Believe it or not, once you get proficient, one of those pens can be moved in 30 seconds and you're on to the next one. You pull the feed, slip the dolly under, pull the whole thing forward. The water is riding right there in the middle where the red is. The water reservoir is on top. So anyhow, you can be very efficient. It's a fairly efficient way to move chickens on pasture. There's cattle panel shelters that some people like. It's just a different version of kind of the Salatin pen that some people like having a higher shelter, and that's great. Here's another option, chicken tractor. You can get creative. Chickens aren't, super tough on stuff, so it doesn't have to be really heavy. It can be pretty lightweight, make it easy to move. My favorite, I guess, and what I've had a lot of experience with is what I call the mobile range coop. This is what we used in Oklahoma. This is a design that I built. And a couple of things I like is the versatility. So you can raise chickens, say you raise a batch of chickens. You can also use this same shelter for, starting transplants, or you could have it in your garden. It's portable, so you could get something started, pull it off your plants, raise chickens during the summer, then you could bring it back to the garden or grow some plants in the fall. So I like things that are multi-use. You could also put, some pigs in there if you wanted to, with some panels on the side, lambs or other small animals. So it's not just a single-use structure. There's lots of things you can do. You can see here, there's also electric wire going around the bottom. This is for predator protection. I never have lost a single bird to predators in this structure. The sides roll up for ventilation. The water's automatic. There's a white pipe going up, so all the water is just fully automatic. And then I'll show you some more pictures here. But yeah, I like it. It's easy to get in and out of, easy to take care of and service. And so here's a picture with shade cloth. When it gets hot, you can throw shade cloth on it, keep the birds more comfortable. Here's just a couple more pictures of rolling sides up and down, and let's see, connecting water on the front there. And you can see there's some heavy duty belting on the front that just keeps stuff from getting in and keeps chicks from getting out. And there's also side boards. It's like 12 inches. I think there's 2 deck boards, 5/4 boards there on the side so you could theoretically use it for winter housing as well and let some bedding build up and then just pull it off. This is a little bit more bare bones. The pipe there that you see is just chain link top rail, so it's readily available. You can go to Lowe's, Home Depot, any construction or home supply store and buy chain link top rail. And then I bought a pipe bender, and there's a place I'll show you in the resources where you can buy a pipe bender. You can bend your own hoops and then buy the hardware, and then we just welded up our skids. And that could be wood. Steel lasts longer. So anyhow, that's kind of there's another shot of it. So um, this is a slightly larger version of a mobile range coop, which is what we're going to be running this year. It's 20 by 36. Oh yeah, so this one is 15 by 20, has a capacity of about 200 broilers. Um, this one is 20 by 36 with the maximum capacity of about 600 broilers. So same idea, just larger. And you definitely would. Downside is of these is you would need something larger to move it. So this is a tractor we had sitting around, and I just left it parked there, hooked up to the coop, so I could drive out there with the four-wheeler with feed, jump on the tractor, move it forward, feed, and I was done. So I could take care of 200 chickens in about 10, 12 minutes as long as they were cooperating that day. So the larger range coops, you'll need a tractor or a truck or some sort of vehicle to pull them. Some people like to use netting. Um, I am not a big fan of the poultry net for broilers, mostly because the corners cross, as you can see, they're just lounging in this picture and they've had to put shavings down. Um, I like the idea of something I can kind of force the birds. I move them every single day and force the birds to fresh pasture, and then I spread the manure out better that way. So, netting is great for layers and turkeys that are more aggressive foragers. I'm just for broilers, especially Cornish cross. It's not great. If you're raising more of a heritage breed broiler, you'd probably be just fine. Okay, so watering in the field. So I'm a big fan of the red bell waterers. As you can see, they can be used in like a gravity situation on the left-hand side. That's just a bucket on top of the pen. You pour the water in and it dribbles down into the pan, or you can hook it up to a low pressure situation, fully automatic water. You can use nipple drinkers. At this stage in the bird's life, they are drinking a lot more water. So I don't want to make them stand there at the nipple drinker wasting water and just trying to get a lot more water. I just want to make it as efficient as possible. And that really, I think it helps, helps them grow faster. So um, the bell waters allow them to just have a more natural way of getting water, which they're, it's kind of the way chickens just drink. So yeah. So feeding on pasture, trough feeders are pretty common, like in those smaller pens, like the Salatin style. That's all that we would use is a big trough feeder. In the mobile range coop, I really like these red feeders. They hold about 35 pounds of feed, and then you can adjust the height, up and down as the birds grow with just a rope. Um, so I like those feeders. They work really well. So space requirements on the bigger birds after 3 weeks, you want to be about 1.25 to 1.6 inches of trough space per bird. Water space can still be about half of that. Capacity is super important. So at this stage, the birds are eating a lot of feed. They will start really just going through the feed. Running out of feed can create a lot of damage to the birds, and a lot of times, if they don't have enough trough space, they'll try to, if they're all lined up eating, the birds behind them will try to jump up on their backs, and they can often cut thighs. So you'll see when you go to the processor, you'll have big, deep scars and gouges in the thigh of the bird. That means you don't have enough trough space, and the birds are fighting to get to the feed. So increase your trough space if you have a lot of cuts in your chicken thighs. And broken wings too. They'll be flapping trying to get at the feed, and they can break their own wings, believe it or not. So keep the capacity, keep them fed, and then try to make sure you have plenty of trough space. And the nice thing about these hanging feeders is there's enough capacity that you don't have to be out there feeding 3 times a day. You can feed once a day, and there's enough feed even when the birds get to 7 or 8 weeks. So you don't have to worry about it. So day-to-day chores with chickens, essentially it's, move your shelter if you're in a pastured poultry type situation. Typically I like to do that in the morning when it's still cool. Birds don't like moving when it's hot in the afternoon or evening. Feed 2 times a day. It's kind of if you have a trough feeder, I'd suggest it. If you have a hanging feeder, you don't really need to feed 2 times a day, and then keep a constant water supply. That's pretty much all there is to it. And then I would say another important component of chores is observation. Take some time to make sure you're observing how the birds are doing. Are the feeders and the waters, about their back height? And that's where you want them. So keep your feeders and waters, kind of in line with the back of the chicken as they grow. So you want to raise those up. Yeah, just make sure no one's sick, everybody's doing well. Yeah, take time for observation. Okay, so feed conversion. In general, you can expect 1 pound of finished carcass for every 3 pounds of feed. So I figure for a 4 pound broiler, I'm going to be going through about 12 to 13 pounds of feed. Now, these are Cornish cross numbers, right? So if you're going to grow a different hybrid or a different breed, you can expect that to be different. But in general, you can pretty down to about 50 pounds of feed with the batch, you can project how accurate your feed usage is going to be. The other thing is that I find that spring birds finish faster than birds produced later in the season. Part of that I think is due to the longer day length. When they have more daylight, they're going to eat longer, and the longer you can keep these birds eating, the faster they're going to grow. And that's why you'll see in the industry they keep lights on them pretty much 24/7 because they find that if they have light, they'll get to the feed and they'll grow faster. So fall birds, I typically like to add, especially as you get into October, another week to the finish time just to make sure I'm getting to where I want to be as far as weights go. Pretty reasonably, I can get a 5-pound bird in 7 weeks. Sometimes in the industry, they're pushing 3.5, 4-pound birds at 6 weeks too. I typically start processing in about 7 weeks. I'll go through and take all the biggest. It's typically what I'll do. But 8 weeks, and this is super feed dependent, right? So if you have really good feed quality and availability, that feed quality can make a big difference, especially in these Cornish cross meat birds. Like I said, they're like a finely tuned NASCAR race car. They have to have everything just right to perform really well and to get some of this performance. So grit also is very helpful because it helps them break down the feed in their crop and their gizzard and get that good feed conversion. Okay, so predator protection. I'm just going to show you a couple things. Like I said earlier, the mobile range coop, I hooked it up to an electric fence. I just ran it along a paddock subdivision that we had, and I was able to easily, after I moved it, just clip back onto the hot fence, and that is just a poly wire literally on some insulators run around the whole thing. And so anything that would try to come dig in was going to get a pretty good zap. I did the same thing for our little chicken pen last year. I just used a poly wire and ran along a fence, and that worked. Didn't have any issues with predators. I know some people will get away with it without anything, just these little, Salatin style pens, and you'll be just fine. The other thing I like about, having the chickens all in an enclosed environment like this, with as opposed to like a feather net or like a poultry netting, is you don't have to worry about like hawks and eagles. And especially around our place, we have a lot of eagles. We're around a lot of lakes. So I think they would be in there every day having a snack. So that's just another reason I kind of like keeping them all contained, is I don't even have to think about hawks and eagles. It's just the ground predators that I have to think about. Obviously, guard dogs can work. Geese can work. I've used both. But I think at the homesteading level, you're probably not going to be getting a guard dog just from your meat chickens. So just keep them closed up, and an electric fence can do wonders for that. Okay, so a few more numbers here, just kind of interesting numbers here. You can expect around 200 pounds of nitrogen from the manure of broilers at 1.5 square feet per bird on pasture. So that would be for like that Salatin style pen, that's a 10 by 12 foot pen. If you've got about 75 birds in there, that's about a 1.5, 1.6 square foot per bird. You'll get about 200 pounds of nitrogen. Now, when they're really little, like 3 to 4 weeks, you're not going to be getting 200 pounds of nitrogen. So that's probably more like an average number. But I just thought I'd throw that in there. It's kind of a neat, interesting fact. And then you can see that picture there is actually where that mobile range coop and the broilers were. And after we moved them, I threw some sorghum sudan down just for fun to see what would happen. And that's the result. I got like 6, 7 foot sorghum sudan. So that's something that could be done as well, integrating some grazing behind your poultry and take advantage of the nitrogen that you're putting down. So mortality, Cornish cross do tend to have a little bit of higher mortality than some other breeds. Part of that's just because they are bred to, their performance is just insane. So you'll do have some more losses. You can get some runts. Depends on how good the hatch is coming from the hatchery, the age of the breeder flock that produce the eggs that are going to the hatchery. There's a lot of different factors that'll go into, the quality of the chick. 10% I would say is benchmark. I would say I have very rarely seen 10% unless there's, some predator issues. 5% or less is very achievable. And also I've seen 2%. So if you're having some mortality and you're not getting to over 10%, don't worry about it too much. That's kind of like the benchmark, especially for pasture raised poultry. You tend to expect a little bit more mortality on pasture just because you can't control the environment as well as in a, tightly confinement house. Okay, ready to process. Okay, so when you get to that 7, 8 week stage, I think these birds are probably about that in this picture. You can start processing, just depends on how big you want your birds. Um, and like I said, like in some situations I've gone through and like pulled out like the biggest ones on week 7 and then finished the rest of them on week 8. You can take some to week 9 if you really want some really big birds, 7 or 8 pound chickens, which are getting to be small turkeys by then. So some tips for processing success. You want to make sure you withhold the feed 12 hours before processing. And that's because um, you want them to kind of clean out all the feed that's in their digestive tract before you go through the processing and the evisceration stage. You don't want to have any of that feed just makes a mess when you're gutting a chicken. So that's something you want to do. Transport crates, transporting them in crates is best, but I've also just loaded them into a stock trailer if you're taking them somewhere to get them processed. If you're on the farm, obviously processing or the distance to the processor is very minimal. Catching birds after dark is awesome. They're all going to sleep, and that's another thing I like about these mobile range coops is you can go out, and I've done it with a couple people. You catch 600 birds in 45 minutes and have them loaded and strapped on the trailer, and you're ready to go. So that's the nice thing about these MRCs. You're not trying to crawl around in a little pen that's 2 foot tall. You can just walk right in there with a stack of crates, and you're catching in the dark with headlamps, and it's just slick. Um, don't let your wings flap when you're catching. So when you catch a chicken, you want to try to grab both legs, or you just grab the whole chicken, put your arms around the wings to keep them from flapping. They can break their own wings if they flap too much, and then you've got a broken chicken wing, and we don't want that. So just kind of keep them controlled when you're catching. So if you're transporting in crates, typically at week 7, I can get 15 in a crate comfortably. Now that depends on how far you're going with the chickens. If you're going a couple hours and it's hot, you probably want to back it down to 12, 10 or 12. Um, but if you're not going a very far distance, you're processing on the farm, 15 in a crate is typically, and obviously this is very like, okay, it could be you have some really big birds at week 7, so it's not going to work. But otherwise, 10 to a crate when they're older at week 8 or 9. If your travel distance is further, I've even seen it where we go down to 8 just to give them more space in the crate so they don't overcook or overheat and cook. So just some little tips to keep your eye on there. Okay, so how are we doing on time, Mary? Got some I think we're doing pretty good. So
Yep.
recommended
Good.
resources. American Pastured Poultry Producers Association is it's a membership organization. It's a national, international organization. They are fantastic. They have an amazing list serve. I get emails from them every day, and it kind of does a roundup of all the different topics. There's so many cool things you can learn. So if you're serious about there, even if you're like just doing it as a homesteader, there's a lot of homesteaders that are, taking advantage of the resources here. They also put up, I think it's a quarterly magazine called Grit. So lots of great information there. Producers all over the country doing this stuff. So highly recommend APA. There's a pastured poultry fact sheet on the SFA resource library that I actually wrote. It was about 3 years ago. So there's a lot of resources as far as places to get feeders, waterers, to find chicks. There's Minnesota hatcheries. There's Minnesota feed mills. Trying to think what else I put in there. Just a lot of good information. So yeah, check that out on the resource library on the SFA website. RobertPlamondon.com is instructions. There's instructions for building an Ohio brooder, or if you email me, I can send them to you as well. So it's pretty easy to throw one of those things together. So that's Plamondon.com is where you can find that. Furchell Company feed rations, furchell.com is you can go on there, browse around. They've got a whole bunch of rations, not just for poultry. There's stuff there for goats, sheep, cattle, everything. They also sell really good minerals. And they've been a sponsor for our Soil Health Summit last couple of years. And so, yeah, so give them some support. They're a great company. Farmer Boy Ag is kind of my go-to for feeders, waterers. You can buy propane brooders from them as well, hovers. So they're a good company to work with. Jeff Maddox is a poultry nutritionist. He works at the Furchell Company. Pretty sure he still works there. He's written several books, couple just specifically on pastured poultry nutrition. So he's a fabulous resource, great guy to talk to about poultry nutrition and stuff like that. Johnny Selected Seeds, they're a seed company out of Maine. That's where I bought the pipe bender for making my own MRC. I want to say it was like maybe 90 to $100 when I bought it. So it's probably more now, but I think it's worth it. You can bend your own pipe and you can build your mobile range coop, and you can also build your own high tunnel too, for vegetable production. So, okay, this is some books I recommend. What's on my bookshelf? You can see that chicken tractor book, just some classics, Joel Salatin's book. I like Harvey Ussery's book, Small Scale Poultry Flock. A lot of good information there. He's actually updated it. There's a newer version of that. Um, the other thing I'm going to throw out there is this Polyface Designs book is really, really cool. It is a 500 plus page, I'm going to call it a textbook on basically building all the infrastructure that Polyface uses on their farm. And so, as you can see, they have step-by-step directions on how to build, say, their broiler pen. They also have like brooder instructions. So it's not inexpensive because it, obviously took a lot of work to put this together. And incidentally, this Chris Slattery, he was an intern at Polyface when I was an apprentice, so I got to work with him quite a bit. But he's an engineer by training, and so he decided that the world needed a book on all the infrastructure that Polyface put together. So pretty cool book. And so if you're interested in any of their designs, I'd highly recommend getting it. It'll save you a lot of hassle trying to build it yourself or figure it out on your own. And yeah, so lastly, happy raising and eating. I'd love to take some questions, and yeah, I'll open up to some questions. And I did put a QR code for my YouTube channel. I do plan on putting up some YouTube videos this summer as we get going with raising broilers. So maybe there'll be some helpful information on there for you in the future.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. That must have been very, very thorough because we don't have a lot of questions. I think you covered a lot. Okay, one thing that came up, could you go back to the slide with the stack of the books? They would like to write them down.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of went over that pretty quick.
Okay. And then somebody else asked, is there a certain type of fence you prefer? I'm asking them to be a little more specific, but I would guess that's referring to, the tractor styles. Which one did you prefer? And that was your MRC, I believe, if you could elaborate on that.
For like fence or for like a shelter?
That's yeah, I know what you mean.
So
They weren't
yeah,
specific.
well, I can answer both. I
Yeah.
prefer the MRC. Obviously, a lot of what I'm saying tonight is coming from my background of producing chickens more on a commercial level. But you can adapt and make that smaller for homestead scale production. And the reason I like it is because it's multi-use. You can use it for so many things, not just raising chickens. A lot of like the Salatin pens, you're only going to use those for raising chickens, right? So to me, I like to, if I'm going to invest in something, I want to have as many possible uses. And on a homestead, you may only want to raise one batch of 100 chickens a year, and then you could put something else in there. So as far as poultry netting, the Premier Poultry Net 42-inch tall is my go-to. They've got 164-foot rolls and 82-foot rolls. 164-foot rolls do get very heavy. So, just keep that in mind. I think they have the weights of them because there's just so much material there. But yeah, it's pretty much my go-to for poultry netting. It's Premier.
Okay, personal question I have. When you're moving your chickens with your MRC, is that a two-person job? I've run into it before where it's almost always a two-person job. Usually it's me and my older daughter. She's in the back watching the chickens to make sure everybody gets up and moves, because they can easily get caught under the tractors. And I've seen people move away from tractors for that reason. So is there any strategy you have for that? Or do you run into the same thing? It's better to just be a two-person job?
I would say Um, yes, if you're gonna go out there and move a bunch of them and really do it, yes. I pretty much always moved mine just one person. And the way I did that, yeah, there's a couple times I'd have to stop the tractor, run to the back and shove them forward a little bit. But I still felt like even when I was doing that, the amount of chickens I could move in the amount of time was so much more efficient than without that setup. There are people that are using, and I do plan to experiment with this some myself, is remote controlled winch. And you can put a remote controlled winch on your tractor or your truck, and then you have the remote in your hand. You walk to the back of the MRC, hit the button, the winch will pull the thing forward, and you can stand there and scare them forward. Now, one thing to keep in mind with mobile range coops, is so like if you have a 10 by 12 foot pen, the furthest they have to move is 12 feet and you're good. With a like a 36-foot mobile range coop, they got to move 36 feet, or that's the maximum they would have to move, right? So grass height will make a big difference if you're trying to make them run through foot tall grass. That's probably not super ideal. So that's why it's nice to keep that down, 4 to 7, maybe 8 inches at the most. And that way they'll move. I do find that like once they figure it out, the first couple moves, you tug that MRC forward or that pen forward, they're gonna run to the front to get the fresh grass. When they get to like 6, 7, 8 weeks, they get really lazy and then they just don't care as much. So yeah, I think it can be done. But even like moving Salatin style pens, even with a dolly by hand, you'll still have the chickens that hang up in the back and you end up running them over. They don't normally get crushed or killed, they just kind of roll out of the pen and you catch them and put them back in. So it's just pretty context dependent, I think.
Got it. Thank you. One more question. Do you have anything to say about if you were to get straight runs, or would you prefer same gender so they don't fight so much, or is that not an issue because they only live to 7 weeks old?
I've not had it be an issue. I typically get straight run. Pullets are cheaper in the broiler side. They have done some study, like there's data out there on feed conversion. I do think they say the pullets are a little bit more efficient as far as feed conversion than like the roosters. Um, but if you raise all cockerels, you're gonna be pretty consistently getting 4 to 5 pound birds at 7 weeks. So some people just want to cut that week of time off. But I always just order straight run, and then I have a variety of sizes for customers. And then the males typically end up in parts and pieces, cut ups, and then the smaller ones end up as whole birds. So,
Yes, and I've definitely run into that too, where the customers they really do want different sizes. There's 4 pound birds that people love because
hmm
they fit in a crock pot great. 7, 8 pound birds, that's getting hard to fit in there, and you don't need
hmm
that unless you have a larger family usually. So
yeah,
yep, they
yeah.
do all find value.
Yeah, growing up, there's a lot of kids in our family. We'd always go for 7 or 8, the biggest birds possible, right? Because then you pull two out and you can feed everybody with two broilers. Even with our small family, we're still finding we'll eat a 5 or 6 pound chicken almost in one meal, as the boys are eating more. So yeah, it's everybody has a different what they want. So
Okay, one more question. What license do I need to raise chickens where I live? Or do you know that, Jonathan? Or I can look that up as well. That wasn't
licensing,
exactly on your
it sounds like that's a township question. So that's probably dependent on your township. Like you shouldn't need a license um, unless you're going to do like a feedlot license, and then that's, I mean, you would probably need, you just check with your county if you think you need a feedlot license. Shouldn't be an issue if you're raising them on pasture, and then you would need a certain number of animal units, and they can tell you what that is. But township is probably if you have a township ordinance or something, you'd have to check with the township.
Okay, next one. At what volume frequency do you find that broiler production becomes really profitable?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's highly dependent on how many can you sell as whole birds and how many can you sell as like parts and pieces. So I, and then it really depends on, do you own your land rent? What do you have available if you're doing a pastured? So there's a lot of variables. I think based on what I can see, I think we can do pretty well at about 6,000 birds. It's probably enough to start paying someone to do a lot of your work, and have some profit left over, pay a fair market rate for labor. 10,000 is kind of what I'm shooting for. So it just varies. But if I sold 10,000 as whole birds, those numbers are probably a third of what they would be if I could sell 10,000 as, boneless breasts and wings and thighs. So that's really where the money is if when you part those birds out, your breast meat basically at typical retail prices is going to be the same as your whole chicken. That's what I've seen. So.
Okay. Do you use or look for organic feed, and then where do you get that from? I know you mentioned for trail.
Mhm. Um, I have used organic feed in the past. I don't now. We use transitional non-GMO. I get my feed from Luxembourg Feed Mill. They're in Luxembourg, central Minnesota, just south of St. Cloud. They have a couple places around the state that they deliver to, and you can get it from there too. That's a fantastic feed. They use Fertrell. NutriBalancer and rations. Had super good luck with their feed. There's a couple other, if you go to the SFA resource library and find that fact sheet, there's a couple other feed mills that I put in there around the state. That might be closer to you than that. Um, I guess the organic feed discussion, if we want to take it a little bit further, is I think the price I would have to charge to be able to use organic feed would really price out most of my customers. Which it's, if I had customers that were looking for that, I'd be happy to entertain that, but my price would probably have to go up by 25 or 30%. So I'd be marketing into a smaller pool of customers that are willing to pay that. And so yeah.
Okay. What kind of processor do you use to sell your birds in pieces? So I think this is heading in the direction of,
Process.
inspected meat.
Yep. Minnesota equal to right now is our plan. There's not a lot of processors to choose from in the state, so it's something we really need more capacity at, and we'll see. It'd be fun in the future to have my own plant, but there's a lot that goes into it. I'd have to get to a certain scale to be able to support that. But chicken processing plant is not that hard to set up. It's pretty simple. So yeah.
Okay, one more. Do you find the safety of the pasture chicks in any mobile coop versus some type of enclosure to lock up? I wonder if do you fear the safety of small animals like weasels, rats being an issue?
Yeah, that's definitely anytime you take chickens out on pasture and kind of put them out there, you're definitely opening yourself up to a higher level of risk, which is why that mortality piece is higher in pastured production, like benchmark is 10% typically. Um, I have found that I've had more issues with like the smaller pens, um, with stuff getting in, raccoons ripping off the chicken wire. I've had things in pens, before they'll dig under with the MRC because I had that electric wire around there that was hot. I never had an issue. And even if something was to try to climb up the side to try to pull, they'd have to hit the wire first. So I haven't even had an issue with the weasel. And then the chicken wire, I just use 1 inch chicken wire on the side. And you can even use smaller hardware cloth if you were concerned, like say you have a lot of weasels in your area. Um, but rats are typically more of an issue in the brooder. Um, Once the chick gets to like 3, 4 weeks, it's going to be pretty difficult for a rat to take it down. It's possible, I'm sure, but it's typically just a brooder issue with rats. So,
Okay. Do you use or sell your chicken feet?
yes, both. We use them to make broth. So when you part out a bird, you get the back. And so we throw chicken feet in there and backs and make a real nice pot of chicken broth. So it's really good for broth. And yeah.
Great. What was it? There was one more. Let me look here. I got a message about it. Um, oh, specifically, what plant are you using for the Minnesota equal to? You said yes, it's very, very limited in this state.
Yeah, we're going down to Kirkhoven, K&S Poultry.
Yeah.
There's Clean Chickens and Co. They will actually process on the farm and they're USDA. Um, but I used K&S last year and I was pretty happy with how they were doing, and they're about an hour and 15 minutes from us, so it's pretty reasonable. So
Okay, one more here along the same lines as the chicken feed. Are there any other markets you enter into with the byproducts from the birds, feathers, or fly fishing industry, etc.?
for Cornish cross, the feathers are probably not going to be desirable now. If you go and raise like barred rocks or some of the more standard breed of chickens, the hackles are very desirable for fly tying. So if you do this, that, I mean, I don't know where I could, I don't know, go to Orvis and see if they're looking, or I don't know, like where the flies are manufactured, but I think that is something someone entrepreneurial could get into. Um, but your typical meat chickens aren't going to have. As far as the other byproducts, yeah, that's something I'm like always thinking about. Like, is there a market for if you're processing your own birds, I know people have developed markets for the blood for, for composting or for garden amendments. The gizzards, if you're willing to peel and clean the gizzards, dog food. I mean, there's probably no end to the options. It's just like, do you have the time and the creativity to figure out how to do it? But I know as we do more parted out birds, we'll have to figure out creative options for backs. If we can't sell chicken backs for broth, like, can we make dog food or find someone who can make a dog food or something? Just to try to waste, nose to tail, try to use the whole thing and not waste it. So good question though.
Okay. Have you ever had issues being the chickens are out in the open with gnats or flies? Sometimes they can be so harsh.
I have not. I have never had that be an issue. Typically on flies, they're moving, every day, so it tends to keep the fly problems down. Um, so yeah.
Okay. So far, we're caught up with the questions now. Good questions. I'm glad these are all coming in.
Someone had a question about how much does it cost?
Oh,
Did we
yes. Yep.
get that one?
Yep. I was trying
Yeah.
to figure out more specifically. I'm guessing, yes, from start to finish.
Oh, start to finish. Okay.
Or
Sure.
did you take it different? Maybe it is different. And
Okay,
that
see.
person is not on anymore, but it would still be valuable.
Yeah, so your chick, yeah, I could run through some costs real quick off the top of my head. So your chick's going to be about $1.90. Well, okay. So if you can buy in quantity, you can maybe get a chick for about $1 or $2 or less than two. If you're only buying a handful, it's probably going to be more like 240 per chick. So find some friends and go together and try to get quantity because you can really save some money that way. Your feed at current feed prices, what I'm getting, you're going to end up with about $7 in feed for 8 week bird. That's averaging or estimating 14 pounds of feed or 14, 15 pounds of feed if you take them to 8 weeks and 5 pounds, 5, 6 pounds. Let's see what other costs you have. Those are the biggest like direct costs. You're going to have a little bit of energy for brooding. You're going to have a little bit in bedding, time. They don't take a ton of time. Processing costs are about $6 to $8 a bird right now. Depends on what you have done for them. So yeah, I think that's kind of roughly sums it up, at least the big costs.
Mhm. Okay, another question that I have specifically, I've had customers ask us if we do soy free or if we've tried that before. We have tried that before. We were not happy with the way they turned out. They took about double the time.
Hmm.
So it's not something that we haven't had enough people ask us to find value in exploring it further.
Hmm.
But have you explored that, or what do you think about that as far as the raising the broiler goes?
Yeah, I've heard different things. I know there is a lot of demand for soy-free product. It's not something I've done personally. Is try the soy-free. I did try a corn-free feed. So when we were in Oklahoma, there's not a lot of corn grown further south. So their substitute for corn was Milo. So we used actually a Milo and peanut meal base for the feed, and there's some soy in there. And that feed was really good. They did very, very well on that feed. So different parts of the country will have different like, commodities that like here, obviously it's corn and beans. That's what we have a lot of. So, but Kansas further south, they grow a lot of Milo, they grow a lot of different grains. So like depending on where you're at, you can get access to different things. But yeah, soy free, I yeah, I assume it works. I just haven't really played with it, I guess, or done a trial. But I do know it's a demand. There's a demand out there for that. So,
Okay, direct message. Can you briefly go over the processing costs of a chicken or the startup costs for purchasing the equipment for processing chickens on your own,
hmm.
if you have that info?
Um, yeah, so if you're gonna do it, I would suggest going to either um, feathermanequipment.com or just Google Featherman poultry processing equipment. And you can get a setup there. I have not looked recently as far as what that kind of stuff costs. You're probably going to spend a couple grand to get yourself set up with a decent plucker, decent scalder, some kill cones. Kill cones, you don't have to have the stainless steel ones. They're really nice. But you could probably use a traffic cone if you had to, or a 5 gallon bucket. People make stuff work, right? The biggest thing I have found is the plucker makes a massive difference in then getting a good scalder. So if you're going to buy two pieces of equipment, buy a good scalder and actually Featherman scalders are good, but I think the ones I like better are the Poultryman. And then if you really want to spend money on a scalder, go buy an Ashley. But you're going to spend probably 8 to 10 grand on that. And that's where it's a complete immersion. So you put the birds in, you turn it on, and it actually is a dunk tank. So it rotates slowly. The birds go through the bottom and it pulls them back up. That actually gets you a better scald. When the bird goes in and out of the water, it's a more complete and like just a more efficient scald. So the feathers come off much better. But that's completely on the commercial end of things if you really want to get into this, big time. But you can, if you're doing 25 birds a year, you can just get one of those, tabletop pickers or hand pluck and just get a good scald or two. But getting that scald correct, it just makes a massive difference in how happy you are the rest of the day doing your chickens. So, yep.
Okay, good deal. Another question. This is often a little bit different topic, and they are aware of that, and that's fine. Have you ever had anybody ask you for gluten-free? Someone has asked them for gluten-free eggs, meaning the hen would have been fed gluten-free. Has
Yeah,
that ever come up?
I have not been asked, but I've heard so many stories about, people just with more and more food intolerances and sensitivities, like that stuff's popping up more and more. So I'm not surprised at all. We are what we eat, and so if our chickens, we're eating something and we're sensitive to it, it's going to come through in the meat. So I don't know if I have a lot of experience to share other than I'm familiar with what's, going on there.
Okay. Another direct message. Do you prefer your chicks vaccinated or not?
I've never vaccinated a chick or had them vaccinated. Um,
Mhm.
I've never had an issue, with anything. So, um, and I think, part of that is the way if you raise them kind of the way I'm suggesting, they're not going to be stressed. Stress is the biggest killer of livestock. So if you can keep them from being stressed, keep feeding water in front of them, give them plenty of space in the brooder, give them good ventilation, treat them well on pasture and take care of them. I've never, I mean, I've had mortality, but I've never had something significant to the point where I think it's necessary to spend the extra, whatever, 20, 50 cents to get them vaccinated. Um, Now, if I was going to go the industrial route and put them in a big house with, 50,000 other birds, it's a different story. Um, but yeah, never had to personally do it. So,
Okay, another question. Where's this one? I was just reading it. Okay. Um,
processing.
this one was in their waters, especially
Hmm.
as chicks. Do you add anything to the water to fortify that for minerals?
I don't.
Okay,
Nope.
straight
I
water.
have, I have in my early years done like a little bit of sugar to try to, like they say, oh, throw a little bit of sugar in there to give them energy. I haven't really found it to be necessary. So no, it's just straight water. Um, yeah, feed.
Okay. One more question. When the processing is complete, is there a better way to freeze the chickens? Freezer storage bags, freezer paper, etc.
Hmm.
Looking for 6 months storage without getting freezer burn.
Okay, so I would say the best thing is if you can vacuum seal that chicken is going to be your best bet. Um, but they do make a shrink bag. I've seen chickens that are shrink bagged. I've never actually done the process myself. So the idea is you stick it in a bag, chicken in the bag, and then you stick it in hot water, and it basically sucks the bag right around the chicken. It's kind of like a vacuum seal without having a vacuum sealer. I would look into that. I think you can buy those bags at Featherman, equipment.com, or I'm sure if you just Google it, you'll find them too. I guess I don't remember who's selling them now, but that seems to be a fairly quick way to seal chickens, because a vacuum sealer takes more time. But unless you have like one of those industrial models. But yeah, I would check that out.
And I've done that before too with the shrink bags. That works really well. Ours definitely, if they last that long, they
Hmm.
last. They'd be fine for a year.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And shelf life on chicken, I mean, a year is, yeah, that's fine. As long as it's sealed up really well, you'll be fine with
Yeah.
that. So.
Okay, another question I came up with when the chicken is being processed, sometimes I've had customers ask about, are you okay with what they spray on the chicken? Sometimes they spray, like we've heard, hydrogen peroxide. I'm not sure exactly what the purpose is, but some customers aren't okay with that. So it's something I've started exploring.
hmm So hydrogen peroxide doesn't concern me because if you the chemical formula for hydrogen peroxide is just H2O2. So all you're getting is an extra molecule of oxygen. So I'm not concerned about hydrogen peroxide. It's probably one of the safest disinfectants out there. I mean, there's people that talk about drinking it and curing all sorts of things. I'm not recommending that, but it is a very good sanitizer. Very commonly used in the dairy industry. So hydrogen peroxide, it will burn your hands if you touch it at a certain concentration. So you do need to dilute it. But typically it's like a couple teaspoons per gallon is the concentration they're using, so it's not harmful at all. Um, Chlorine like is often used, so that's one thing I probably wouldn't want on my birds. Air chilling is becoming more and more common. At most of the places I've worked in a couple different poultry, slaughterhouses and Polyface, we did everything was just water bath chilled with ice. They're saying it's more efficient to do air chill. I've never been in a place that, well, actually, my KNS does air chill, I believe, and they say it's faster. It's less energy usage to air chill. They also say the flavor's better because you're not getting all that water in the meat. I don't know. So if you air chill, I guess I don't know for sure if they have to spray them down to keep stuff growing on them. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But if it's hydrogen peroxide, I don't care. Chlorine, yeah, I kind of care. I don't want chlorine on my chickens. So yeah.
Okay, great. I guess anybody else have questions? We'll stay on here a little bit longer to make sure we get everybody answered, but right now we are caught up.
Great. Oh, there's a new message. Oh, you are welcome.
Let me see.
Long rake. Use hands. Typically. Uh, I find that by the time you grab an extra tool and stick it in the chicken, you can have the lungs out with your hands. So I they do make vacuums and all these different things. I don't know. I've never used them. So your fingers will be a little sore at the end of the day after doing a couple hundred with just your bare hands, but it's part of it, I guess.
Okay, I think we will wrap things up then.
Alrighty.
We are